Unbeknownst to Siakar, the Dark Angels had already struck a catastrophic blow against the Night Lords. El Johnson's meticulously coordinated ambush on the Night Lord's fleet as it traversed the Sagualsa subsector had devastated the 8th Legion. In a series of brutal engagements, the Lion's forces had annihilated dozens of Night Lord's capital ships, leaving nearly a quarter of their fleet in ruins. Even their Primarch, Conrad Kurz, had been grievously wounded in a reckless duel with the Lion. Yet before the Lion could strike the killing blow, the shattered remnants of the Night Lord's fleet fled into the warp, carrying their critically wounded Primarch with them. Later, after a painful recovery, Kurz, accompanied by Jago Sevatarian and a handful of Atramenta, launched a desperate boarding action against the Dark Angels' flagship, Invincible Reason. Though Sevatar and the elite Terminators fought valiantly, almost all were slain, and Sevatar himself was captured. Kurz, however, evaded capture, slipping into the labyrinthine depths of the Invincible Reason. For solar months, the Night Lord's Primarch stalked the shadows of the Dark Angel's flagship, a ghostly presence that haunted the mortal crew. Despite numerous hunter-killer teams sent by the Lion to hunt him down, Kurz eluded them all, picking off his pursuers one by one. Frustrated by the losses, the Lion himself took up the chase, pursuing his elusive brother through the bowels of the ship for 16 relentless solar weeks. Despite his efforts, Kurz remained hidden, a shadow that even his brother could not pin down. Amidst this pursuit, the Night Lord's captives somehow escaped, disappearing into the void. The saga continued with the rise of the Imperium Secundus, a second empire founded by Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion after the Ruin Storm cut off all contact with Terra. Though intended as a bulwark against the traitors, this new empire was marred by chaos when Kurz rampaged across Macragge, wreaking havoc until he was confronted by Guilliman and El Johnson. Though they attempted to kill him, Kurz's cunning trap brought down a chapel on the two Primarchs before he once again vanished into the shadows. They were only saved by the intervention of warsmith Barabbas Dantioch, who, using the alien Pharos device, pulled the two Primarchs to safety from the ruins. Siakar's ambitions, however, would not see such reprieve. As his Atramenta guards raised their bolters and unleashed a barrage of fire, the vainglorious Clawmaster fell, his life extinguished not by an enemy, but by his own kin. As his relentless pursuit of Conrad Kurz wore on, Lion El Johnson found himself frequently at odds with Robut Guilliman over the governance of Imperium Secundus. The tension between them flared particularly over how to handle the rebel uprisings on Macragge, which the Lion was convinced were stirred up by Kurz himself. When a suicide bombing targeted an Astartes convoy, the Lion responded by imposing martial law on Macragge, deploying his first legion to crush the unrest. Believing that Kurz was hiding in the rebellious Illyrium region, the Lion proposed an orbital saturation bombardment to annihilate the area and ensure Kurz's death. His plan, however, was met with resistance from Emperor Sanguinius and Guilliman, who balked at the potential civilian casualties. Relenting, the Lion instead unleashed his legion's dreaded Dreadwing to scour the region for Kurz and his rebel allies. During a brutal assault on the city of Alma Mons, the Lion finally cornered his elusive brother, and the two clashed in a ferocious battle. Despite Kurz's vicious resistance, El Johnson triumphed, demanding to know why his brother had turned against the Emperor. Kurz's answer was chillingly simple. Why not? He went on to explain that a monster in his mind had always driven his actions, one he could never silence. Though Kurz lay at his mercy, the Lion found himself unable to deliver the killing blow. Instead, he pummeled Kurz again, ripping the power pack from his armor and brutally snapping his spine over his knee, leaving the Night Haunter paralyzed. The Lion then dragged the broken Kurz before Sanguinius and Guilliman for trial. A triumvirate was convened, where Kurz defended his actions by claiming he had merely acted according to the nature for which he was created, thus committing no crime. He further fueled the rift between Guilliman and the Lion by accusing El Johnson of disobeying orders and launching an unsanctioned orbital bombardment, despite Guilliman's explicit command to avoid civilian deaths. Furious, the Lion attempted to kill Kurz on the spot, but Sanguinius intervened, calming the situation. In his wrath, Gilliman seized the lion's sword from L. Johnson and snapped the blade across his armoured leg. L. Johnson, enraged and humiliated, was dismissed by Sanguinius and banished from Imperium Secundus. The Dark Angels soon withdrew from Macragge, but the lion brooded over recent events aboard his flagship, Invincible Reason. He questioned his decisions over the past solar decades, searching for answers amidst the chaos of war. Before departing for Caliban, the lion returned to the chamber of the Tuchulka engine. With the device's power, he teleported himself and Holgin, his lieutenant and Deathbringer of the Deathwing, back to Macragge. As Sanguinius prepared to execute Curse, the lion interrupted the proceedings, urging the Emperor's angel to stay his hand. He explained that Curse had foretold his own death at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor. This vision, L. Johnson reasoned, was proof that the Emperor was still alive beyond the ruined storm. Sanguinius, recognizing the truth of his own precognitive visions, conceded that the lion's logic was sound. When Gilliman asked what should become of Curse, the lion pledged to serve as his brother's jailer. Curse, however, found twisted amusement in the chaos he had caused among the Primarchs. And so, the Night Haunter was imprisoned aboard Invincible Reason, where L. Johnson would visit him, hoping to extract useful information from his precognitive abilities. Yet Curse, now healed from his injuries, remained largely uncooperative, choosing instead to mock his captor. During this time, Invincible Reason travelled alongside the combined fleet of the Ultramarines, Dark Angels and Blood Angels, as the three Primarchs sought a way through the ruined storm to Terra. When Sanguinius received a vision that his destiny awaited him on Davin, he boarded Invincible Reason and took the imprisoned Curse with him, hoping to gain insight from his brother's foresight. Sanguinius aimed to show Curse that fate was malleable, that destiny could be changed. However, to reach Curse, the Angel of Baal had to subdue several Dark Angels' guards, enraging the lion, who nearly ordered the destruction of Davin with cyclonic torpedoes in retaliation. Despite the tension, the three Primarchs, Sanguinius, Gilliman and L. Johnson, followed Curse to Davin, where the four of them ventured to the cursed temple of the Serpent Lodge. Here, Curse's view of an immutable destiny was challenged as events unfolded that he had never foreseen. When Sanguinius was swallowed by a portal summoned by the demon Madail, Curse, shaken and despairing, admitted he had no answers, his once certain visions failing him in the face of these unforeseen events. As the warp erupted with demons, Curse was dragged back to Invincible Reason, his fragile confidence shattered. In the aftermath, the ruined storm began to dissipate, revealing a path to Terra, though it was heavily blockaded by Horus's fleet. Gilliman and L. Johnson agreed to create a diversion, allowing Sanguinius and the Blood Angels to reach Terra, where the Angel of Baal had foreseen his ultimate fate. Sanguinius took custody of Curse, placing him aboard the Red Tear, the Blood Angels' flagship, vowing that the Night Haunter would face the Emperor's judgment once they arrived on Terra. However, Sanguinius had other plans. As they prepared for the final journey, he placed Curse in a stasis coffin, declaring that, just as he would soon meet his own destiny, so must Curse fulfill his. He launched the stasis coffin into the void, knowing it might take millennia, but that the Imperial assassin Moshen would one day find Curse and deliver the death he had foreseen. And so, raging against his fate, Conrad Curse was left drifting in the endless blackness of space, waiting for the destiny he had so long dreaded to finally come to pass. Enshrouded within his stasis coffin, Conrad Curse drifted aimlessly through the void for the duration of the Horus heresy. His somber journey eventually came to an end when the coffin was salvaged by an Imperial vessel, the Sheldrune, some years after the conflict had ceased. Among the crew was a covert assassin from the Calidus Temple, codenamed Gun, who shattered the stasis capsule's surface, stirring the Night Haunter from his slumber. Still consumed by fury, Curse exacted a grim vengeance, massacring the ship's crew in a blood-soaked rampage. In the aftermath of the slaughter, only 3 remained alive: Curse himself, a lone crewman named Elver, and the assassin Gun. Before succumbing to the Primarch's wrath, Gunn managed to alert the Kalidas Temple to Kurz's location in the galaxy. As for Elva, he was spared, but only to serve as Kurz's unwilling slave and navigator aboard the Sheldrune. The ship lacked a warp drive, condemning them to a 4-year journey to Zagwalsa, where the last stronghold of the Night Lords awaited. Throughout their journey, Kurz tormented Elva, alternating between cruel mockery and philosophical teachings, revealing his dark reflections. By the time they reached Zagwalsa, Elva had gleaned more about Kurz's troubled psyche than most would dare. He sensed a hidden doubt within the Night Haunter, a nagging uncertainty about the veracity of the prophetic visions that had driven him for so long. To ensure this dangerous knowledge would not spread, Kurz had his legion execute Elva upon their arrival, reuniting with his Night Lords under the command of Talos Valkyran. Kurz, unlike many of his traitorous Primarch brothers, was never blessed with demonhood by the ruinous powers. His end came not through ascension, but by the blade of the Kalidas assassin Meshen on Zagwalsa, the very fortress world where the Night Lords had sought refuge after the destruction of Nostromo. Kurz had always borne the burden of foresight, a prophetic curse that haunted him with visions of the bleakest possible futures. His final prophecy foretold his own death at the hands of someone like Meshen, a truth he had long accepted. This psychic ability, deeply ingrained within his genetic legacy, passed down to his sons, the Night Lords, was a rare trait untainted by the warp's corruption or traditional psychic mutations. It is widely believed that Kurz permitted his own assassination, not as a surrender, but as a means of affirming his convictions. In his own grim worldview, his death would serve as a final message to the Emperor, a demonstration that he had remained steadfast in his beliefs, just as the Emperor had in his. While Kurz freely admitted his atrocities, he argued that his martyrdom would vindicate him and his actions. In a final order, Kurz forbade his legion from pursuing his assassin, though this directive would be defied. His acceptance of death marked the tragic culmination of his worldview, a bitter triumph that he could never have achieved under the Emperor's dominion. In death, Kurz's influence over the Night Lords did not fade. His legion continued to wield terror and fear as their chosen weapons, carving out a legacy that mirrored their fallen Primarch's nihilistic philosophy. Although they outwardly pledged themselves to the ruinous powers of chaos, their true allegiance lay with their own twisted form of justice, warped by the teachings of the Night Haunter. Unlike the other traitor legions, the Night Lords did not flee to the Eye of Terror following the failed Siege of Terror. Instead, they remained a scourge upon the galaxy, establishing their dominion through campaigns of terror in the Eastern Fringe. However, the methods of the Night Lords became increasingly reckless, reflecting the unraveling sanity of their Primarch in his final days. The once calculated terror that had earned the Legion respect was gradually replaced by violent outbursts, incoherent rage, and senseless sadism. Kurz's closest confidants, including Jago Sevatarian, watched in despair as their leader descended into madness, losing the purpose that had once defined him. The Emperor, deeming Kurz too great a threat, eventually dispatched the Kalidas Temple of Assassins to eliminate him. Meshen, one of their finest agents, succeeded in ending the life of Conrad Kurz, fulfilling the prophecy the Night Haunter had long foreseen. With their Primarch's death, the Night Lords fractured, splitting into countless war bands, as is the fate of many who walk the path of chaos. Leadership disputes tore the Legion apart, with numerous commanders vying for dominance. By the 41st millennium, the once formidable 8th Legion had diminished in both numbers and might. Bereft of a unifying leader, they turned to mercenary work, offering their services to other forces of chaos or to marauding pirates like Huron Blackheart. The Night Lords frequently fought alongside Abaddon the Despoiler in his Black Crusades, but their thirst for vengeance against the Imperium remained their driving force. One of their most infamous raids in the post-heresy era was the assault on Scound's Fall, a world perilously close to Holy Terror itself. It is said that nearly all of the Raptors serving Chaos today trace their lineage back to the Night Lords Legion. In the era Indomitus, the Night Lords greeted the opening of the Great Rift with grim delight. The Imperium Nihilus, cast into utter darkness and cut off from the Astronomican's light, became a playground for the Legion's depraved ambitions. Now, with half of the Imperium in chaos, the remnants of the Night Lords prospered. Their methods grew ever darker as they plundered Departamento Munitorum worlds, raided Space Marine fortress monasteries, and stripped gene seed from the dead. Worse still, the Night Lord's sorcerers devised horrific new methods of preying upon humanity's desperation. By abducting and torturing astropaths, they learned to twist the psychic trauma of their victims into siren signals, dark beacons that lured stranded Imperial vessels into their grasp. In the shadows of the galaxy, the sons of Conrad Kurz erected monuments to terror, delighting in their every atrocity as they continued to enact their grim legacy of fear. Across the vast expanse of time, no traitor legion has inflicted more psychological damage upon the Imperium than the Night Lords. As the fires of the era Indomitus continue to burn, their terror raids and predatory hunts grow ever more frequent. Once scattered, these warbands now gather under a singular, ominous purpose, foreshadowing a grim fate for the worlds of mankind. The castigation of Venori, unknown date, 30th millennium. In the early Great Crusade, alliances were still fresh, their bonds untested. As the Imperium pushed beyond the Sol system, its nascent dominion remained fragile, and rebellions were common. While most uprisings were swiftly and quietly extinguished, there were instances when subjugation alone was insufficient. Venori, a fortified city carved into the chasms of Terra's pan-Pacific empire, was one such case. It had been among the last bastions of the tyrant Nathan Dume to fall during the Unification Wars, and its people had never truly accepted imperial rule. This discontent was exacerbated by the rise of the Crimson Walkers, a cabal of psychers, gene splicers and warlords, remnants of the tyrants who once reigned over Terra during the Age of Strife. Gradually they spread their influence, seeking to pull part of Terra back into its nightmarish past, with Venori as their stronghold. Upon hearing of their resurgence, the Emperor uttered 3 words: "Send the 8th." At that time, the 8th Legion, numbering only 500 warriors in the Sol system, was a force insufficient to overwhelm a city of millions. But the Night Lords did not wage war through sheer numbers. They used terror. The assault began with an orbital bombardment, lasting 6 solar hours, followed by an artificial darkness that cloaked the city. Chemical-laden rain poured from the sky, drenching the terrified populace. Emerging on jets of flame, the 8th Legion butchered all who crossed their path. Their speaker grills echoed with the cries of the dead, amplifying the terror. The Crimson Walkers fought back with hordes of mutant monstrosities, but the Night Lords pressed on, their claws wreathed in lightning, carving through their enemies. Soon the city burned like a fiery maw, and reinforcements descended in drop pods. Fragmented and isolated, the Crimson Walkers found themselves hunted, cornered by the figures in midnight-clad power armor. Those who attempted to escape met a cruel fate, hunted through the artificial night by seeker squads, maimed and dragged back to the chasm alive. As the city of Venori lay in ruins, the Night Lords completed their grim work. The Crimson Walkers were thrown into the chasm, alive and conscious, alongside 10 million inhabitants who had sought refuge in the cliff-bound structures. The 8th Legion triggered explosives, severing the city from the cliff face, sending the entire enclave plummeting into the abyss. With dawn still hours away, the Night Lords withdrew, leaving behind only screams and fire, solidifying their mastery over fear as an instrument of imperial retribution. Early Crusade campaigns, unknown date 30th millennium. In the nascent days of the Great Crusade, the Night Haunter led his warriors in several infamous campaigns. In one, they razed an entire temple devoted to a forgotten agricultural deity, incinerating the settlement to the ground. Another grim episode saw the Night Lords unleash a viral bombardment on a continent after discovering a burgeoning Slaneshi chaos cult. These brutal actions drew the ire of other Space Marine legions who condemned the 8th for their excessive use of force. The hunting of the Akhirath, unknown date 30th millennium. The Akhirath, known as the Bone Drinkers, were a parasitic alien species. Their collective intelligence derived from a gestalt of interconnected organisms. These creatures fed by painfully siphoning bone marrow from living beings, primarily humans. Lacking technological innovation, the Akharith scavenged void ships and raided remote colonies along the fringes of the western segmentum solar. Initially thought to have been exterminated during early Crusade pogroms led by the Lunar Wolves and the Night Lords, some marrow blooms managed to escape. By the year 986 of the 30th millennium, reports indicated a resurgence of Akharith activity, threatening isolated outposts and vulnerable shipping lanes. The Alpha Legion, recently united with their Primarch, was tasked with finishing the Xenos Scourge. Over the course of a 3-year campaign, the Alpha Legion hunted down the remaining Bone Drinkers, purging the species before it could regain its former strength. These events, spanning the early Great Crusade, solidified the Night Lord's dark legacy as masters of fear and terror. From the burning chasms of Venori to the desolate worlds plagued by the Akharith, their cruel tactics left scars that would linger across the Imperium for millennia. As their warbands unite once more, the galaxy braces for the return of terror incarnate. Shehugal Purge, unknown date 30th millennium. During the Great Crusade, the Night Lords, alongside the Titan Legions Legio Volcanum I, Dark Fire, and Legio Volcanum II, unleashed a genocidal campaign of such relentless fury against the Shehugal Dominion that it became legendary, even in an era overshadowed by Horus's treachery. The scale of the devastation wrought upon the Xenos was vast, carving this purge into the annals of history as a tale of brutality and ruthless efficiency that stood out even amid the galaxy-wide conflicts of that era. Castigation of Terentius, unknown date, 30th millennium. In the Ordoni cluster, the Imperium initially encountered warlord Vitali Geron Terentius, who prudently chose survival and surrendered to the forces of the Great Crusade. Over the following decades, Terentius rose to power, conquering worlds near the Halo stars in the Emperor's name. His reputation swelled, even earning him the attention of Malcador and several Primarchs. However, when he eventually betrayed the Imperium, launching a contra-crusade to seize compliant worlds for his empire, the shock was palpable. The Imperium responded decisively, dispatching Horus and the Lunar Wolves, supported by the Night Lords, Iron Hands and Alpha Legion, to shatter the rebellion and send a message to all potential traitors. At the height of the campaign, Horus personally teleported with 50 Justerin Terminators to the bridge of Terentius's flagship and killed the traitor with his talon. Fragmented, Terentius's rebel forces crumbled, terrorized by stories of whole worlds being culled by the Night Lords. The 8th Legion systematically decimated each of Terentius's worlds, while the Iron Hands and the Ordo Reductor laid waste to his strongholds, reducing them to ruins. His homeworld's very atmosphere was poisoned, ensuring no survivors. Upon the completion of the castigation, Horus sent Terentius's gilded skull to Terra with the grim proclamation, "So perish all traitors." Compliance of Kara Atan, 154. 6, unknown date 30th millennium. The Night Lords fought alongside the Salamanders under Primarch Vulcan during the compliance of Karatan, supported by the Legio Ignis Titans and Mechanicum forces. Throughout the campaign, the Night Lords employed their usual brutal tactics, slaughtering an entire city's population to instill fear in the masses. Vulcan, incensed by Curz's savage methods, confronted his brother, resulting in a brief but fierce duel. Though the campaign ended in victory, the fallout from this clash would sow the seeds of enmity between the two Primarchs, a rift that widened over the course of the Great Crusade. The events on Karatan would later echo through Vulcan's fate during the Dropsite massacre at Istvan V. Pacification of the Chirot system, year 984 of the 30th millennium. The joint compliance effort in the Chirot system saw the Night Lords fighting alongside the Emperor's children and Imperial fists. During this campaign, Fulgrim, troubled by Curz's erratic behavior, attempted to comfort his brother after one of Curz's violent outbursts. In a moment of vulnerability, the Night Haunter confided in Fulgrim about his visions of death, fratricidal conflict, and the eventual destruction of Nostramo by the Emperor's light. Deeply concerned, Fulgrim shared these portents with Rogel Dawn, who took grave offence at the implication of the Emperor's failure. Their ensuing confrontation ended with Dawn grievously injured and Kurz weeping over his brother's fallen form, consumed by guilt and self-loathing. Exiled to his chambers under guard, Kurze vanished, leaving behind only the butchered corpses of his captors as he fled into the warp with his legion. Destruction of Nostramo, year 984 of the 30th millennium. In the aftermath of Kurz's assault on Rogel Dawn, the Night Lords enacted an exterminatus upon their own homeworld. By concentrating devastating lance strikes on Nostramo's unstable core, the 8th Legion triggered seismic cataclysms that tore the planet apart. This act fulfilled Kurz's grim vision of his world being annihilated by beams of light from the heavens. Recalled to Terra to answer for his brutal tactics, Kurz instead joined Horus in open rebellion during the Horus Heresy, choosing treachery over facing his father's judgment. Dropsite Massacre of Istvan V, 566th year of the 31st millennium. In response to Horus's open rebellion, the Emperor dispatched 7 legions to bring him to justice on Istvan V. Commanded by Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, the first wave included the Raven Guard Iron Hands and Salamanders, who successfully established a beachhead at the Urgol Depression. However, unknown to the Loyalists, the legions of the second wave, comprising the Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors and Word-Bearers, had already sworn allegiance to Horus. The treachery unfolded when the second wave descended, not in support of their Loyalist brethren, but to slaughter them. As Ferrus Manus led his veterans against the feigned retreat of Horus's forces, the traitors encircled the Loyalists. Ferrus Manus fell to Fulgrim, beheaded during their fateful duel. Meanwhile, the Raven Guard and Salamanders were left reeling from the traitors' onslaught, with Korax barely escaping Conrad Kurz's clutches and Vulcan's fate left unknown. The massacre left the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard decimated, their once proud legions reduced to a fraction of their strength, while the traitor legions basked in their bloody victory. These events, from the purge of Shihugel to the tragic slaughter at Istvan V, mark pivotal moments in the dark history of the Night Lords and the wider conflict that reshaped the galaxy. As instruments of fear, vengeance and treachery, the Night Lords played their part in the downfall of the Imperium's unity, leaving behind a legacy of terror and ruin. Thramma's Crusade, 9th year of the 31st millennium. During the tumultuous era of the Horus Heresy, the Warmaster Horus dispatched the Night Haunter and his 8th Legion on a genocidal campaign against the imperial strongholds of Heraldar and Thramas, in the Aegis subsector of the eastern fringes. This brutal assault was aimed at securing Horus's flank and preventing the Dark Angels from reinforcing the Loyalist cause. The conflict stretched on for nearly 3 years, bitterly fought at every turn. In a bid to manipulate Lionel Johnson into joining Horus, the Night Haunter set a deep void beacon in the path of a Dark Angel's outrider vessel, signalling a parley on the desolate world of Sagwalsa. His goal was to unnerve and break his brother, either mentally, physically, or both. The 2 Primarchs, accompanied by warriors from their personal honor guards, met in an uneasy civility. This fragile peace shattered when the Night Haunter slandered El Johnson, provoking the Lion into striking his former brother. The clash devolved into a violent brawl, with both sides quickly engaging. As the Night Haunter choked the life from El Johnson, one of the Dark Angel's honor guards thrust his sword into Kurz's back, saving his Primarch's life. Reinforcements from both legions arrived, pulling their respective Primarchs away from the fray. Though bloodied and bruised, both survived to continue the war for dominance in the Aegis subsector. Hunting the Night Haunter, circa 9th year of the 31st millennium. The next confrontation saw the Dark Angels execute a brilliantly planned ambush against the Night Lord's fleet as it moved through the subsector. The trap, orchestrated with the Lion's characteristic precision, left the Night Lords shattered, their fleet in ruins and their Primarch gravely wounded. Nearly a quarter of their legion fleet was lost in the battle, but the remnants of the Night Lords managed to flee the Dark Angel's relentless pursuit. In a final act of defiance, Conrad Kurz, along with Sevatarian and the elite Atramenta, launched a desperate boarding action against the Dark Angel's flagship, Invincible Reason. This bold assault claimed the lives of nearly all the Atramenta, with Sevatarian captured and the survivors taken prisoner. Kurz, however, evaded capture, stalking through the bowels of the capital ship, sowing terror and chaos among the crew. Despite the Lion's best efforts, including personally taking up the hunt, Kurz continued to elude him, slaughtering every kill team sent to bring him down. For 16 agonizing weeks, the Lion hunted his elusive brother throughout the vast corridors of the Invincible Reason, but Kurz always remained just out of reach. Eventually, the remaining Night Lord's captives managed to escape into the void, fleeing their inevitable demise. Arrival to Ultramar and Imperium Secundus, 9th of the 31st millennium. Amid the chaos of the ruin storm, which severed the Imperium in two by blocking the Astronomican's light, the Dark Angels realized they could not return to Terra to aid in its defense. Even with the advent of the Tuchulka engine, warp travel was rendered nearly impossible. However, a beacon, the Pharos on the world of Sotha, guided the First Legion fleet safely through the warp to Macragge, Ultramar's capital. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Guilliman and Sanguinius, whose blood angels had also been guided by the Pharaohs. Together, the three Primarchs established Imperium Secundus, a new empire meant to continue the fight against the traitors and safeguard the Emperor's vision. Guilliman declared Sanguinius the rightful heir to the Emperor's throne, and named him ruler of Imperium Secundus, while Lion L. Johnson was appointed Lord Protector, commander of all its military forces, a title akin to that of War Master. However, the formation of this new empire was soon marred by the escape of Kurz from the Invincible Reason. The Night Lord's Primarch launched a reign of terror across Macragge, leaving destruction in his wake. Guilliman and the Lion eventually cornered Kurz, but their attempts to kill him were foiled when Kurz triggered a trap, collapsing an entire chapel upon them. Only the swift intervention of Barabbas d'Antioch, a loyalist Iron Warrior's warsmith, who was in communication with Guilliman through a portal opened by the Pharaohs, saved the two Primarchs. D'Antioch instinctively reached through the portal and pulled them to safety on Sothar. Battle of Sothar, 9th of the 31st millennium. Sothar, a remote world near the edge of the galaxy's eastern fringe, lay at the boundaries of both the 500 worlds of Ultramar and the Imperium's farthest reaches. Beneath Mount Pharos, the planet's tallest peak, the Ultramarines had uncovered a massive alien construct. This ancient device, built by an unknown Xenos species, served as both a beacon and a route finder, allowing instantaneous communication across vast distances, even penetrating the violent storm of the Ruin Storm. Following their defeat by the Dark Angels at Sagwalsa, remnants of the Night Lord's fleet were drawn to Sothar by the Pharaoh's beacon. Over the course of several months, the Night Lords gathered intelligence on the Ultramarines' activities, eventually uncovering the device's arcane nature. They launched a surprise assault on the lightly defended world, hoping to seize the Pharaohs to locate their flagship Nightfall and their missing Primarch, Conrad Kurz. In the ensuing battle, Barabbas d'Antioch sacrificed himself by overloading the Pharaohs, ensuring the Night Lords could not exploit its powerful empathic abilities. The true ramifications of this act would only become clear 10,000 years later, as its far-reaching consequences continued to shape the fate of the galaxy. Capture and trial of the Night Haunter, circa 11th year of the 31st millennium. Obsessed with capturing the elusive Night Haunter, Lion L. Johnson and Guilliman repeatedly clashed over how best to secure Imperium Secundus and quell the rising rebellion on Macragge, which the Lion was certain Kurz had a hand in. After a suicide bombing targeted an Astartes convoy, the Lion enforced martial law using the First Legion, convinced that Kurz was hiding in the rebellious Illyrium region. He advocated for a massive orbital saturation bombardment to eliminate his brother, but both Emperor Sanguinius and Guilliman opposed such extreme measures. Relenting, the Lion instead deployed his Dreadwing to flush out Kurz and the insurgents. During the assault on the city of Alma Mons, the Lion finally cornered the Night Haunter, and the two Primarchs clashed in a brutal fight. Emerging victorious, L. Johnson demanded to know why Kurz had turned his back on the Emperor, to which Kurz responded coldly, "Why not?" He explained that a monstrous force in his mind drove his actions, one he could not control. Though the Lion had Kurz at his mercy, he could not bring himself to kill his brother. Instead, he pummeled him, ripped off his backpack, and brutally snapped Kurz's spine over his knee, leaving him paralyzed. The Lion dragged the grievously wounded Kurz before Sanguinius and Guilliman to stand trial. During the triumvirate, Kurz defended his actions, claiming he was merely acting according to his nature as designed by the Emperor, and thus could not be guilty of any crime. He further fueled the discord between Guilliman and the Lion by accusing the latter of ordering an orbital bombardment against Guilliman's directives. Enraged, L. Johnson attempted to kill Kurz, but Sanguinius intervened. Guilliman, in a fit of fury, shattered L. Johnson's lion sword across his armoured thigh, ending the trial and dismissing the Lord Protector from his position. Banished from Imperium Secundus, the Lion and his Dark Angels departed Macragge hours later. However, the Lion was plagued by regret as he brooded in the chamber of the Tukulka engine. Reflecting on his banishment of Luther, the death of Nemiel, and the many decisions that weighed heavily upon him, the Lion ordered the device to teleport himself and his trusted Lieutenant Holguin, known as Deathbringer, back to Macragge. As Sanguinius prepared to execute Kurz for his crimes, the Lion and Holguin teleported into the chamber and demanded that Sanguinius cease. With troops surrounding them, the Lion explained his reasoning. He argued that Kurz's precognitive visions of his death at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor were proof that the Emperor still lived. Sanguinius, recognizing the truth in the Lion's words, knew that his own visions of his fate would inevitably come to pass as well. When Guilliman asked what would become of Kurz, the Lion knelt before his brothers, pledging to serve as Kurz's jailer. Siege of Terra. In the final days of the Siege of Terra, the Night Lords, bereft of their Primarch, continued to fight under the banner of War Master Horus. Led by First Captain Jargo Sevatar, they participated in the assault on the Imperial Palace. However, Sevatar was slain in battle, and after Horus's defeat at the hands of the Emperor, the remaining Night Lords retreated to their fortress on Sagwalsa in the Eastern Fringe. Eastern Fringe Genocide. Following Horus's death and the defeat of the traitor legions at Terra, most fled into the Eye of Terror. The Night Lords, however, chose a different path. Instead of splintering like their fellow traitors, the remnants of the Legion embarked on a genocidal campaign across the Eastern Fringe, unleashing terror on the Imperium with a ferocity unmatched in history. Their actions betrayed a growing sense of self-destruction, mirroring the madness of their fallen Primarch. This rampage of death and despair only ended with Conrad Kurz's assassination by the Calidus assassin Mushen, after he was rescued from stasis aboard the Invincible Reason by an Imperial salvage vessel and returned to his legion on Sagwalsa. Castile V Massacre. Year 832 of the 33rd millennium. Periclitor, a Chaos Lord, who once belonged to the Night Lords, sealed a dark pact with the ruinous powers to ascend to demonhood. As part of this ritual, he sacrificed 1,000 Imperial souls, including missionaries and Adeptus Sororitas members. The Dark Gods were pleased with his offering, granting Periclita the apotheosis he sought. Culling of Grendel's world. The Night Lords conducted a systematic extermination of the population of Grendel's world, a remote planet in the Isobel Cloud near the Eastern Fringe. No one was spared in this brutal purge, further cementing the Night Lord's legacy of terror. Death of Howling Griffins. Chapter Master Furioso. During an ambush on Arios Point, a Night Lord's warband led by Periclita boarded the ship of Chapter Master Orlando Furioso using Dreadclaw assault boats. The Howling Griffin's defenders were forced to abandon the vessel. The battle moved to the surface of Arios Quintus, where the Night Lords slaughtered Furioso and the Griffin's first company. The traitors mounted Furioso's corpse on his Thunderhawk's prow, broadcasting its location for the system to see. The remains were discovered a month later by other howling griffins Astartes, false saviours of Garagos. In a dark collaboration with the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords posed as loyalist space marines to save the algae-mining Garagos entrenchment from the Orc crushback. For a few brief days, the people of Garagos believed they had been saved, only to discover they had merely traded one brutal oppressor for another. The new tyrants, the Night Lords, proved to be far more malevolent than the Orcs ever were. Sons of Grendel. In the 34th millennium, the Imperial frigate Hand of Mercy responded to a residual distress call from Grendel's world, only to find that every inhabitant had been hunted and slaughtered. The symbols carved into their corpses identified the killers as Night Lords. A century later, Grendel's world was resettled, with the massacre becoming a mere folktale. However, 7 millennia later, the same horrific scene unfolded again, triggering a full-scale crusade by the Mortifactors chapter. Determined to hunt down the perpetrators, the Mortifactors dispatched their swiftest vessels in pursuit. Twisted justice. After millennia of slaughter, the Night Lord's warlord Andvrek's wrath grew disillusioned with indiscriminate violence. He vowed to emulate his Primarch's early days, punishing only those he deemed truly deserving. However, his sense of justice became horribly warped. Wrath exacted such grievous acts of retribution that soon none dared cross him for any offence, be it as grave as murder or as trivial as mispronouncing High Gothic. Though he found a fleeting peace in his mission, his broken morality led to atrocities worse than ever before. The Claws descend on Chokehold Gillis Venst. A Night Lord's warlord launched devastating hit-and-run attacks on the spacelifts and orbital stations of the crime-ridden cargo world of Chokehold. In a lightning series of strikes, Venst's warband escaped with vast supplies of ammunition, power units, and dozens of freshly conscripted recruits. Search for Shadeblight. While searching for the possessed Chaos cruiser Shadeblight, the Night Lords tore through the Ango subsector, wreaking havoc. They were initially opposed by the Space Marines of the Red Wolves chapter, who ultimately denied the Night Lords their prize. Kaizan Uprising's chaos descended on the agri-world of Kaizan during a public holiday when traitor planetary defense forces, Chaos cultists and Night Lords Marines launched a surprise assault. Led by Chaos champion Gorsameth, the forces of Chaos overwhelmed the unprepared defenders. Despite the presence of summoned demons, their numbers were few, as Kaizan's distance from the Eye of Terror and the Night Lord's lack of devotion hindered the warp summoning rituals. The beleaguered defenders, including the 122nd Cadian Shock Forces led by Captain Fane, fought valiantly. Fane and his company perished defending an Adeptus Arbites precinct house. But the Imperial Fists arrived in time to break Chaos's stranglehold on Kaizan, slaughtering every traitor to a man. Scound's Fall, a Night Lord's flotilla, infiltrated the Cadian Gate and set its sights on Scound's Fall, a planet just 100 light-years from Terra and home to a prestigious Schola Progenium Abbey. After 7 days of unrelenting carnage, the Night Lords left no survivors. The butchered remains of both sides were arranged in dark, talismanic patterns, summoning a demonic horde that ravaged half the planet. As the Night Lords fled toward the Eye of Terror, their audacious attack sent shockwaves through the Imperial military, leading to the court-martial and exile of Lord Commander Solar Jackson for his failure to prevent the massacre. Fall of Villamus. The fortress monastery of the Marines' Errant chapter fell during a brutal assault led by the Red Corsairs, who had struck a dark bargain with the Night Lords, particularly a warband led by the Chaos champion known as the Exalted. The Red Corsairs and Night Lords sacked the monastery to claim its vast gene seed stores. However, tensions soon arose as the Night Lords sought to reclaim one of their strike cruisers, Echo of Damnation, leading to infighting between the two traitor forces. 13th Black Crusade Abaddon the Despoiler launched his 13th Black Crusade, aiming to tear open a path for Chaos to invade Terra once more. Night Lords' warbands sowed terror across the Scarus sector, disrupting Imperial communications and hanging the corpses of their victims from every structure. Their acts of terror and psychological warfare battered the Imperium's morale, even among its most faithful defenders. Among the operations attributed to the Night Lords was a false claim that the Dark Angels were in league with Chaos. An Ordo Malleus kill team was dispatched to investigate, only to find the broken bodies of Night Lords slain by the Dark Angels in a fury of righteous retribution. Meanwhile, Howling Griffins, Chapter Master Alvaro diverted his Sword of Destiny from the larger war effort to seek vengeance against the Night Lord's Demon Prince Pericletor, ultimately banishing him to the Warp in a titanic battle between the Howling Griffins and Pericletor's warband. Amidst the chaos, the Night Lord's warlord Tarak Darkblood had his Styx-class heavy cruiser crippled by the Imperial Navy, but a Chaos fleet rescued him before he could be captured. Empire of Fiends. After the fall of Cardia and the rise of the Great Rift, panic and madness swept through the Imperium, and the Night Lords thrived amidst the chaos. Isolated from the Emperor's light, they established small tyrannical empires across star systems, cut off by the Noctis Eterna. An ill-fated crossing navigators discovered a temporary real-space channel near the Corinthus system that allowed safe passage through the Cicatrix Maledictum to Imperium Nihilus. Desperate Imperial fleets hurried to make the crossing, unaware that the Night Lords had engineered the safe region through demonic pacts. Once the ships were deep within the Great Rift, the Night Lords launched vicious boarding actions, capturing dozens of vessels. The Long Night. As the Astronomican's light was cut off during the Noctis Aeterna, thousands of star systems were plunged into darkness. Seizing the opportunity, Night Lords' warbands ravaged the Imperium, unleashing more raids and acts of pillage than ever before. Toledus War. In the Segmentum Solar's Veritas subsector, the Word-Bearer's Dark Apostle Cor Phaeron launched an assault on the shrine world of Benediction. Joining him was the Night Lords' warband, led by Chaos Lord Yaris Kine. Based aboard the battleship Nightmare of Celix, the Night Lords struck first, sending a kill team to destroy the astropathic relay on Satropol, silencing Imperial communications with a devastating cyclonic charge. Meanwhile, the Nightmare of Celix slipped into real space, carrying thousands of tortured astropaths. Their psychic anguish was unleashed in a scream that disrupted communication and navigation across the system, luring Imperial reinforcements into deadly traps. In the asteroid belt known as the Tears of the Emperor, the Night Lords' fleet lay in wait, ready to feast on terror and plunder. Their campaign faced a stalemate, however, as the White Scar's Vanguard Space Marines launched a series of hit-and-run attacks on Imperial Navy shipping in the system, forcing the Night Lords into a prolonged and brutal conflict. Second Relief of Mordian, Iron Crusade. Unknown date, 42nd millennium. As Imperial forces retreated from the Stygius sector amidst the chaos of the invasion, the Iron Hands resolved not to follow suit. Instead, they regrouped on the besieged world of Mordian, determined to confront the Chaos forces laying siege to the planet. Joined by a modest contingent of the Mordian Iron Guard, the Iron Hands aimed to refashion themselves and eliminate the weaknesses they had previously displayed during the campaign. During the siege, they found allies emboldened by the perceived cowardice of the Imperial forces, including the Brazen Claws, Fire Lords, Silver Skulls, Sons of Medusa, and Iron Lords. This coalition became known as the Iron Crusade. Upon their arrival, they discovered that Mordian was under the sway of a Night Lord's warband, commanded by Aharak Deathshriek, who sought to harness the terror instilled in the populace to fuel a chaos ritual that would cast the entire planet into the warp. The Iron Hands and their allies launched a direct and unyielding counterattack, emerging unexpectedly from the warp to engage the traitor fleet in orbit before executing a drop-pod assault on Mordian's capital. Clan Averni, led by Iron Captain Canuck Var, spearheaded the charge, while Deathshriek relentlessly hurled his Chaos cultists against the Iron Hands' firepower. One by one, the remaining Iron Hands clan companies joined the fray, ultimately culminating in Var wounding Deathshriek in single combat. However, as the Iron Hands drop zone faced renewed assaults from the Benediction Guard and the Cult of the Whispered Word, renegade warlords across the sector united in their ambition to obliterate the Iron Hands. The Loyalist assault began to falter, and Deathshriek proclaimed victory as he launched a counter-offensive against the Iron Hands in space, his fleet outmatching theirs 3-1. It was at this crucial juncture that the Iron Hands' successor chapters arrived. Caught off guard, Deathshriek's armada was swiftly dismantled by the reinforcements. The newly arrived Loyalist warships unleashed a devastating barrage upon the Mordian populace. Although the orbital bombardment appeared indiscriminate, it was a calculated assault based on the tactical doctrine known as Hammer and the Storm. This strategy had been executed on the ground as well as in space, designed to provoke the renegades and traitors into reckless actions. What had initially seemed like a faltering Loyalist advance was merely a tactical pause, allowing the Iron Hands tech marines to erect void shields and bolster the surviving bunkers of the capital city. As a result, the Iron Hands and those segments of the Mordian populace deemed worthy of survival withstood the catastrophic bombardment, while their adversaries, emboldened by the prospect of victory, were left vulnerable. In just over an hour of relentless bombardment, the Chaos grip on Mordian was shattered for the second time. Eventually, further Imperial reinforcements arrived from Cypra Mundi, enabling the Iron Crusade not only to expel the Chaos forces from Mordian, but also to launch counterattacks against Chaos garrisons on nearby worlds. The governing Iron Council of the Iron Hands then initiated a second phase of the campaign, planning to cleanse the remaining worlds of the Mordian system of their Chaos presence and reclaim the refineries and orbital shipyards of the neighbouring Karvos system from Chaos control. As of now, the campaign continues. The legacy of Nostramo wove its way through the very fabric of the Night Lords. Externally, they adhered to a structure resembling that of many other Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade, yet beneath this surface lay the intricate courts of Nostramo, infused with gang traditions and an aesthetics of terror that permeated every aspect of the 8th Legion. At the squad level, the Night Lords deployed a diverse array of units, although Breacher siege squads were notably less common compared to those in other legions. Unique formations such as the infamous Terror Squads, dedicated to instilling sheer horror in their enemies, and the Night Raptor Squads, who would swoop down upon foes, leaving trails of their slain, while broadcasting shrieks from modified voxcasters, further defined their character. Nearly all squads within the 8th Legion possessed distinctive names, replacing mundane designations. Thus, a squad within a company could be known as Claws, Talons, or various other epithets often paired with indications of rank or honour, such as the Stygian Talon, the 10th Claw, or the 5th Oathed, among countless others. The company served as the fundamental strategic unit within the Night Lord's Legion, with each squad belonging to a company that typically numbered between 100 and 1,000 warriors. Most companies bore a title in addition to their numerical designation. For instance, the 27th Company was known as the Shattered Skull, the 104th as the Sable Brothers, and the 71st as the Crimson Judges. Unlike many other legions, the Night Lords utilized battalions and chapters as semi-permanent groupings of companies, favouring their own divisions rather than a universal structure. This intricate organization belied a surprisingly effective and adaptable approach to warfare, enabling the 8th Legion to operate with considerable fluidity, easily fracturing into autonomous units or coalescing into ad hoc formations as dictated by their commanders. A notable instance of such a unique formation was the Crimson Suns, which emerged from the remnants of the 8th Legion's 9th Company during the Terran Unification Wars after suffering near-total destruction during the pacification of the wasteland domain of Occitania. The Emperor, in his wisdom, offered the King of Occitania the title of Rogue Trader in lieu of execution. The Crimson Suns retained elements of the 8th Legion's early heraldry before the return of Conrad Kurz, functioning as a cohesive unit alongside the rogue trader Gotha before rejoining the 8th Legion. The subsequent fate of the Crimson Suns remains uncertain, and it is possible they perished during the tumultuous battles of the Horus Heresy that followed the Dropsite massacre. Conrad Kurz reigned as the Dark King of his legion, a figure evoking both fear and loyalty among his sons. While genuine loyalty existed, many were bound to him through fear rather than adoration, and some even harboured resentment towards their gene-sire. Kurz appeared indifferent to these dynamics as long as obedience to his commands was maintained. Surrounding him was the Dark King's court, known as the Chiroptera, comprising senior officers from across the 8th Legion, transcending traditional ranks. Each member possessed a quality deemed valuable by Kurz, though in some cases this quality was little more than distilled bitterness and cruelty. Membership in the Chiroptera did not confer absolute rank, but they constituted the ruling elite of the Night Lords, and few dared to openly defy commands issued by its members. Alongside the Chiroptera were the Atramenta, a company-sized formation clad in Terminator armor and armed with the finest weaponry. They served as the personal retinue of the first captain of the Night Lords and enforcers of order within the Legion. Renowned for their cold brutality and unwavering loyalty to their commander and their primarch, the Atramenta were widely believed to act as Kurz's executioners when necessary, though this remains unconfirmed. Beneath the Chiroptera, the various captains of the companies operated. Those fortunate enough to command several companies within a battalion or chapter bore a variety of titles, such as Commander, Master, or Regent. While these leaders wielded clear authority over their assigned units, their power within the broader 8th Legion appeared more flexible. A regent might command a handful of captains, but could find themselves subordinate to a different captain from the Chiroptera, or another exalted figure. Just as squads and companies were designated with unique names, so too did the commanders of the Legion embellish their titles with additional monikers. Many of these titles resonated with the cursed nobility and gangs of Nostramo, such as Talon Master, the Bloodless, or the Sightless Revenant. Some were undoubtedly intended as calculated insults, either adopted by their bearers out of perverse pride, or simply enduring as unflattering nicknames. By the time of the Drop Site Massacre in the 5th year of the 31st millennium, the Night Lords had been teetering on the brink of renegade status for several years. They seemed to engage in their own conflicts, largely disregarding or remaining disconnected from the broader chain of command established by the Great Crusade. As a result, an accurate assessment of their strength had not been conducted for some time. Estimates of the Legion's numbers vary widely, with some sources placing their strength at just over 90,000 Astartes and others at 120,000. The Legion was known to have recruited from subjugated worlds during the latter part of the Great Crusade, often abducting the youth of entire star systems to cultivate suitable aspirants. The use of rapid psycho-conditioning and accelerated gene seed implantation was prevalent among the Night Lords, further supporting the notion that their numbers were at least comparable to those of many more populous Space Marine legions. It is also likely that several elements of the Night Lords were absent from the Istvan system, engaged in self-directed actions in the galaxy's unconquered corners at that time. Night Lords employ special forces on their quest for galaxy domination. The Atramenta were an elite unit of battle brothers clad in Terminator armor, drawn from the formidable ranks of the Night Lords' First Company. Under the leadership of the notorious First Captain Jago Sevatarian, these lethal warriors donned Tartaros-patterned Terminator armor and wielded the finest weaponry available to the Legion, showcasing their lethal proficiency on the battlefield. However, alongside their fearsome arsenal and exceptional combat skills, the Atramenta shared the fractious and rebellious spirit characteristic of their Legion. Commanding such a force required the strongest-willed leaders, those capable of exemplifying the very behaviors they sought from their charges across the myriad battlefields of the Great Crusade. In this environment, the Atramenta thrived as shock troops. Their irascibility and spite artfully channeled to unleash a crescendo of savagery upon any adversary that dared to oppose them. Following Captain Sevatarian's death during the Siege of Terra, leadership of the Atramenta transitioned to the Terran-born Night Lord Zo Sahal. However, like much of the Legion after the Horus Heresy, the Atramenta largely disbanded as a cohesive force, dispersing among the successor war bands of the fractured 8th Legion and serving as bodyguards to various Night Lord Chaos Lords leading their own contingents of Chaos Space Marines. The Contikar, also referred to as the Contikar Elite, comprised elite Night Lords Terminators utilized as shock troops, adept at instilling panic and dread with their very presence. Their prowess in the steadfast prosecution of war earned them considerable renown among the Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade. In truth, the Contikar were little more than ruthless butchers, summoned when the 8th Legion sought to unleash not just terror but profound despair and destruction upon their enemies, incinerating their armies, dismantling their infrastructure and collapsing the foundations of their civilization. Comprising a haughty warrior class within the Night Lord's Legion, the Contikar were recruited from Nostramo's ruling elite, carrying with them the contempt and corruption held by those ignoble potentates toward the imperial citizenry. Obsessed with status and hierarchy, akin to their mortal kin, the Contikar maintained an air of superiority, only deigning to fight for leaders they deemed worthy, or those possessing noble Nostraman blood. They were frequently dispatched to usurp command from lesser Night Lords leaders deemed unfit for the Legion's objectives. This brutal yet pragmatic approach was favoured by warlords such as First Captain Jago Sevatarian and others from both the Old Terran Legion and the newer Nostraman recruits, who relied on the savage efficiency of the Contikar to lay waste to their enemies, serving as an example to any brethren who might falter in their duties. Only Conrad Kurz and First Captain Sevatarion could command the Contikar without hesitation. Other Night Lord officers risked dire consequences for attempting to summon these elite killers, as the Contikar constantly sought to elevate their own position within the Legion's hierarchy, interpreting any signs of weakness as an invitation to eliminate a rival and seize command. Terror squads were specialized units of Space Marines employed exclusively by the Night Lords during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. When the Legion aimed to unleash the most visceral punishment and retribution against their enemies, the terror squads of the 8th Legion were dispatched. These headhunters, torturers, flayers and mutilators encompassed the coldly dispassionate and darkly imaginative brethren of the Night Lords. Initially, their gruesome arts of murder and mayhem were calculated means to an end. However, as the decades of the Great Crusade progressed, the terror squads became a refuge for the Legion's most unstable and unsubtle elements. Many within these ranks stood under sentences of death, commuted only so long as they proved useful to their morbid master. The Night Raptor squads existed as a distinct caste within the Night Lord's Legion, not so much a martial elite as a bloodthirsty coterie of murderers, unified by shared proclivities and favoured styles of warfare. Equipped with jump packs and an array of close combat weaponry, the Night Raptors unleashed unrestrained savagery upon their foes in a singular, overwhelming onslaught. Unlike the rest of the Legion, which was wielded as a weapon, the Night Raptors shunned subtlety in favour of assaults as brutal and direct as a butcher's axe, cleaving through flesh. This elite assault formation revelled in soaring above the battlefield like predatory screams, relishing the moment when a victim's death was reflected back at them through the eyes of their killer. In many ways, the Night Raptors served as the ancient precursors to the later Chaos Space Marine Raptor assault troops found among all the traitor legions following the Horus Heresy. The Night Lords had access to the full range of war machines utilized by the Emperor's armies during the Great Crusade. Despite their preference for terror tactics and infiltration over traditional set-piece battles, they still made use of formidable vehicles. Due to the independent operation of each of the Legion's companies, most Night Lords' vehicles were maintained at the company level, with squadrons providing direct support to their respective squads. A few companies within the Legion opted to function exclusively as armoured formations, often acting on the direct orders of the Primarch or the 8th Legion's command cadre, when multiple companies were assembled as a battalion or chapter and required substantial armoured support. One such company-sized armoured unit was the Karadara Armour Claw, whose reputation had spread beyond the Legion prior to their treachery. The masters of this formation had perfected an armoured combat style mirroring that of the 8th Legion as a whole. striking from the shadows of dusk or dawn when possible. The Caradara assaulted the enemy at their weakest points, rampaging through rear zones to sever communication lines, disrupt resupply efforts, and isolate concentrations of enemy troops. Having accomplished these objectives, the Caradara methodically destroyed their targets at their leisure, in accordance with the preferences of individual squadron or vehicle commanders. Notably, the Caradara favoured using prow-mounted dozer blades to bury enemy troops within their own trenches, while others derived twisted satisfaction from overrunning helpless defenders and grinding their bodies beneath the treads of their armoured vehicles. Unsurprisingly, few defences endured long against such brutal assaults. Throughout the Great Crusade, the Night Lords harnessed a diverse array of resources, demonstrating an ability to adapt even the most standardized weapons and armor to suit their favored methods of warfare. Armored troop transports of all classes were deployed by the 8th Legion to breach the enemy's defenses, adorned with grotesque trophies that instilled horror and dread in all who beheld them. Aircraft were employed to rain death from the night sky, descending without warning to strike at the enemy's most vulnerable points, ensuring that no foe could enjoy even a fleeting moment of rest or respite. The Night Lords also made greater use of automated systems, such as the Tarantula, compared to many other legions. They preferred to delegate mundane tasks, like static defense, to these robotic weapons, incorporating them into offensive strategies cunningly designed to funnel enemy forces into pre-registered killing grounds identified by the Legion's artillery masters. Genetically, the Night Lords' Chaos Space Marines exhibit several unique traits inherited from the gene seed of the Night Haunter. They all possess very pale white skin and haunting black-within-black eyes reminiscent of their Primarch. They can see in absolute darkness with a clarity that surpasses even that afforded by normal Space Marine ocular implants. Additionally, they possess an innate prey sight, enabling them to perceive heat signatures in the infrared spectrum. Lastly, a Night Lord's Astartes can emit abnormally loud shrieks and cries that induce immediate deafness and disorientation in those who hear them. The Night Lords generally avoid utilizing demons in their armies, primarily due to their skepticism towards chaos, with the exception of Furies. Demons of chaos, undivided, that share the Night Lord's affinity for brutal murder and psychological warfare. The Legion does not worship any individual power of chaos, but instead venerates the concept of chaos undivided when they choose to acknowledge it. Indeed, the Night Lords harbour a certain contempt for all ruinous powers, as well as for any perceived weakness, a mistrust inherited from the Night Haunter, who had no fondness for the major chaos gods, just as he had for his father, the Emperor. The Night Lords also exhibit mistrust towards psychers of all kinds, including astropaths, though they may employ them, along with navigators, when circumstances demand it. By the late 41st millennium, some Night Lords may have succumbed to the taint of chaos, developing mutations that they attempt to conceal from their brethren. Traditionally, the Night Lords share the same disdain for mutation as their loyalist counterparts, viewing it as a sign of physical and spiritual weakness. Some of the original traitor legions have retained a degree of fraternal loyalty, albeit in a twisted form. The Night Lords had little loyalty to begin with, and over the millennia they have become increasingly self-centered and cruel. Each warrior vies with his comrades for the most glorious kills, to spread the most terror, and to adorn his war gear with the most elaborate trophies of battle. The Night Lords' Legion is organized into companies, each led by a captain and composed of squads of 10 Astartes, referred to as claws, and commanded by sergeants. Among their ranks is an elite Terminator unit known as the Atramentar, and at least one dreadnought. When preparing for combat, the Night Lords proudly declare themselves in midnight clad, a nod to both their heritage and their penchant for operating under the cover of darkness. The Chiroptera were the Night Haunter's most trusted advisors and confidants within the Night Lords' Legion. Comprising 7 selected captains, the Chiroptera operated outside the conventional command structure of the 8th Legion. Together they represented the soul of the Night Lords, supporting their Primarch and guiding the Legion's temperament and strategic decisions. The Atramenta were the elite terminators of the 8th Legion's formidable First Company, led by the infamous First Captain Jago Sevatarian during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. This elite cadre was composed of Astartes selected by their Primarch for their exceptional ferocity and cruelty. Each member was known by name and reputation both within and beyond the Night Lord's Legion. Following the Night Haunter's demise at the hands of the Imperial assassin Mushen on Sagualsa after the heresy, the Atramenta scattered alongside the rest of the Legion. By the 41st millennium, they often served as bodyguards to powerful Chaos Lords commanding various Night Lords' warbands. Although originally outfitted in Tartaros pattern Terminator armor, many surviving Atramenta adapted other patterns captured from loyalist Astartes over the centuries as their original armor became damaged or worn out, with little chance of securing replacement parts. Among the Night Lord's ranks lie the feared Chaos Space Marine assault troops known as Raptors. This elite cadre of egotistical and arrogant warriors views themselves as superior to their allies and fellow renegades. Many within the ranks of other Chaos Space Marines regard them as preening, self-indulgent narcissists. The origins of this specialized group can be traced back to the tumultuous days of the Horus Heresy, where they excelled in the critical role of shock troops. At that time, jump packs were still a relatively uncommon technology among the Space Marine legions, but the effectiveness of these assault troops frequently proved to be a decisive factor in battle. Often held in reserve, they would be deployed to exploit the weakest points of the enemy line. This predilection for preying on vulnerabilities has shaped the Raptors into ruthless hunters capable of striking anywhere at any moment. The Raptors tend to modify their armor to create a more fearsome appearance, often resembling a vicious bird of prey or a swooping demon. They frequently equip their helms with amplifiers and voxcasters that emit piercing wails and screams, descending upon the enemy like a furious gale, tearing through their foes with bolt pistols and vicious chainswords. In combat, the Night Lords invariably deploy large contingents of Raptors. A gift from his master, the Legion's first captain Zo Sahal, the Talon Master, the Unguis Raptors, or Raptor's Claws, were archaic lightning claws incorporated into his power armor. In doing so, he also coined the name for his command company within the First Company. Before the Horus Heresy, referred to by the Night Lords solely as the Great War, Zo Sahal's Unguis Raptors Company became justly feared by the enemies of the 8th Legion. Serving first in the name of the Emperor and later for the Night Haunter alone, they delivered swift death from above to their foes. Surprise is an insubstantial blade, a sword worthless in war. It breaks when troops rally, it snaps when commanders hold the line. But fear never fades. Fear is a blade that sharpens with use. So let the enemy know we come. Let their fears defeat them as everything falls dark, as the world's sun sets, as the city is wreathed in its final night. Let 10,000 howls promise 10,000 claws. The Night Lords are coming, and no soul that stands against us shall see another dawn. The War Sage. Malkarian, excerpted from The Tenebrous Path. The Night Lords meticulously emulate the modus operandi of their Primarch, reveling in the art of instilling fear and chaos among their adversaries. It is customary for these Chaos Space Marines to incapacitate the communications of their target planets, broadcasting horrific messages and chilling screams across the airwaves, while they begin their merciless slaughter of the inhabitants at their leisure. The Night Lords seldom engage with forces capable of resisting them. They prefer to prey upon the weak and terrified. Numerous accounts attest to their relentless nature, revealing a complete absence of mercy. Any unfortunate soul who dares to surrender will find their pleas met with brutal mutilation and a torturous death. Night Haunter's Legion lacks a holy crusade or any noble cause that justifies their spread of death and despair. They also lack a martial creed. The concept of honor has long since eroded, replaced by their identity as warbands of savage killers. Masters of stealth, the Night Lords excel at infiltrating positions swiftly and silently. This skill seems to be intrinsic to the Legion, and is most often employed during the sadistic games they play to drive their victims into frenzies of terror. Once they have prepared and secured optimal locations for their assaults, the Night Lords can execute sudden, shockingly brutal ambushes or unconventional attacks designed to deplete enemy ranks or simply sow chaos among their foes. One particularly fear-inducing tactic involves the Night Lords unleashing a vox-augmented scream lasting 15 seconds, which can rupture the eardrums of any unprotected individuals nearby. As their victims writhe in agony, stunned and deafened, the Night Lords unleash their wrath. Even prior to their fall to chaos, the Night Lords adorned their armor with death imagery, fully aware that fear can serve as an effective weapon as powerful as any chainsword or bolter. Given their propensity for targeting weaker foes, a fully armored Night Lord's Chaos Champion, equipped with a devastating array of weaponry, is invariably more than a match for the adversaries he chooses to confront. Since the heresy, Night Lords' warbands have attracted a larger proportion of raptors than any other traitor legion. The swooping assaults once favoured by Conrad Kurz are echoed in the diving, tearing attacks of the Night Lord's raptors. Predators that strike from above amidst a cacophony of shrieks that can induce even the most stoic veterans to falter at critical moments. Night Lords' names are typically derived from the ancient Nostromo culture, often supplemented by designations reflecting physical traits, personality quirks, notable deeds, or other defining characteristics. Examples of Night Lords' names include Karos Reeve, Drakos Nightblade, Myros Balikor, Jago Cade, Ravkos Solita, Otho Nosferus, Keltarask, Garrus Kavatar, Tovek the Agonizer, Naravesh Mercygiver, and Malithos of the Midnight Claw. Do you hear their cries? Can you taste their fear, their agony? Know this, mortal, we are coming for you. Salvaged Vox transmission from the dead colony of Nuxhaven, Travanthe 6. The Space Marine legions frequently underwent transformations upon the rediscovery of their Primarch and their surrogate homeworld. In the case of the 8th Legion, Nostromo and Kurz were both a blessing and a curse. Initially, they appeared to be the least altered of all the legions upon the return of their gene-sire. While there were indeed changes, many were relatively minor. Nostroman became the predominant language of the 8th Legion, its intricate runes and sibilant tones infusing the Legion as darkly humorous and fatalistic recruits from Nostramo joined their ranks. New traditions emerged, twisted reflections of Nostraman gang customs, such as painting the gauntlets of condemned legionaries red to signify that a death sentence loomed over them. The honorific titles held by many officers of the 8th Legion began to resemble those of the noble courts of Nostramo. These modifications, though perceptible, did not alter the essence of the 8th Legion. If anything, Kurz's return intensified their righteous drive for punishment. The Legion's methods of warfare remained unchanged, and the swift integration of Terran and Nostraman warriors was among the fastest of any Legion. The old and the new melded seamlessly, like two sides of a coin, both forged from darkness to impose order and strife, and both born of flesh originating from forsaken and lightless places. Though callous and brutal, the Night Lords possessed a certain pride. The trappings of aristocracy and dominion formed a crucial aspect of their identity, and rivalries, often violent, were rampant among the Astartes of the 8th Legion. The gang traditions of their shadowy homeworld permeated every facet of their legion. Few among their ranks lacked a title, and their weapons and armour were adorned with remarkable, albeit grotesque, craftsmanship. Moreover, the Night Lords were notorious for embellishing their armour and vehicles with the tortured and mutilated remains of those who had dared to resist them, perfecting the art of flaying and displaying the dead to instill fear in their foes. Initially, these gruesome displays served a methodical purpose, sending a chilling message. This fate awaits you as well. Among the myriad horrors that dwell within the chaotic depths of the Eye of Terror, terrible demons and horrific monsters vying with cruel pirates and vile Xenos to spread death and destruction, few strike as much dread as the Chaos Space Marines of the Night Lord's Traitor Legion. Since the time preceding the Horus Heresy, this legion has honed the craft of instilling terror, discord and confusion in its victims, with their corrupted Astartes becoming ever more sadistic and depraved as the Terran centuries have passed. The Night Lords are merciless killers who revel in terrorizing their enemies before mercilessly dispatching them. They are ruthless and opportunistic, often striking at vulnerable targets and toying with their unfortunate victims. When the Night Lords kill, they do so with violent and lingering brutality, relishing the pain and horror reflected in their victims' faces as life ebbs away. Such acts are not performed in honor of the Chaos Gods. Rather, a Night Lord kills simply for the sake of killing. While there may be ulterior motives behind their actions, more often than not, the driving force is merely to taste the blood of their victims. As veterans of countless campaigns of terror and conquest, each member of the Legion is highly trained and adept in the art of terror tactics, psychological warfare, and executing lightning raids and ambushes designed to leave their opponents demoralized and easy prey for the depraved heretic Astartes. The Night Lords frequently act as mercenaries for renegade warbands and other pirate raiders, selling their skills to the highest bidder in exchange for plunder and the opportunity to select targets that appeal to their sadistic nature. However, the Night Lords harbour no genuine allegiance to any of the ruinous powers or the mightiest Chaos Lords. Their path is their own, and any who assume otherwise do so at their peril. Above all, they seek to kill, deriving great satisfaction from slaughtering the defenseless and helpless. The thrill of battle does not concern them. They often bypass capable foes, instead targeting the weak and ruthlessly hunting down all who stand in their way. Following their killings, the Night Lords mutilate and butcher their victims, providing grim examples of the fate that awaits those who fall prey to the Legion. Some Night Lords will even embark on raids independently if it aligns with their needs, their skills, and their tactics, regardless of any imbalance in fighting strength. Indeed, there are legends of solitary Night Lords instilling terror within entire hives, reducing these mighty cities to chaos through their bloody rampages. However, the Night Lords hold no concept of honor and may readily switch sides in the midst of battle, or treacherously attack former allies to serve their own agendas. The Legion does not pledge true allegiance to any of the four ruinous powers and views all forms of religious devotion as weakness. Instead, it is their love of killing, particularly that of terrified and defenseless prey, that unifies the Legion and drives them to serve chaos. Although they do not worship a single chaos god, the Night Lords frequently ally with more fervent followers of chaos. The Night Lords exhibit remarkable versatility in their employment of the forces of chaos, wielding the hellish powers of each of the major deities with equal fervor. They may just as easily be found fighting alongside a band of foul plague marines as with the undead warriors of the Thousand Suns. Nevertheless, it is clear that the Night Lords harbour disdain for faith in all its manifestations, whether it be the fanaticism of the Cornate Berserkers or the zeal of the Imperial Creed. The only authority recognized by the Astartes of this traitor legion is one based on temporal power and material wealth. Observational evidence suggests that the Night Lords engage in battle solely for the pleasure of killing and the material rewards it brings. They take immense satisfaction in gunning down defenseless victims, especially those who are too young or weak to defend themselves. It is certainly not the thrill of battle that motivates them. A force of Night Lords can be expected to employ every underhanded tactic available before resorting to honorable combat. This behavior likely stems from their origins in the criminal underbelly of Nostromo, where the strong often imposed their will upon the weak. Remarkably, the gene seed of the Night Lords appears surprisingly pure, showing minimal signs of mutation. Before their descent into chaos, the only notable physical anomalies were their jet-black eyes and pale skin, features that became even more pronounced with the incorporation of Nostromo's somber genetic material. Surprisingly, among all the traitor legions, the Night Lords exhibit the least evidence of mutation. This may be due to a notably stable gene seed or the fact that they seldom align themselves with any particular chaos power for extended periods. However, the true legacy of their mad primarch seems to be psychological. A tendency towards paranoia and self-destructive behavior is often evident among many within the Night Lords. They revel in psychological warfare and fear tactics, finding twisted delight in these methods. It is also said that their chaos sorcerers possess a significant vulnerability that leaves them prone to painful seizures, during which they experience visions of the future, whether vague or explicit. The Night Haunter was believed to foresee only the darkest paths among all possible futures, a terrible curse that often led to self-fulfilling prophecies. It is speculated that the sorcerers of the Night Lord share a similar fate. While this remains conjecture, given their Primarch's susceptibility to such prophetic visions, it seems highly likely.